Who are we? It's a question in the hearts of many Americans, struggling to make sense of a country torn by political division, economic instability, and cultural conflict. David Giffels, a celebrated author and professor of English at the University of Akron, sought answers by exploring how his own state of Ohio, the proverbial bellwether and battleground state, has been grappling with that very question. In his latest book, Barnstorming Ohio to Understand America, Giffels recounts his recent tour of a uniquely diverse state that, from its smokestacks to stubble plains, is in many ways a cross-section and microcosm of the country. He speaks with factory workers and farmhands, politicians and poets, startup brewers and booksellers, taking the pulse of Ohio to diagnose the nation. In the opening pages of the book, Giffels writes that, in anticipation of the upcoming presidential election, his goal was to pursue an important question of identity at one of the most critical junctures in modern American history by letting Ohioans speak for themselves about their lives and communities, something that, despite media attention each election year, happens less often than you might think. Here, Giffels speaks for himself, shares his experiences in writing the book, and what he has learned. David, thank you for being here.
Thanks for talking to me about it.
Early in the book, you describe yourself as a, quote, lifelong, doggedly committed citizen of a state that's often easier to leave than to love. You are one who has spent most of his adult life thinking and writing about Ohio. What is it that you love about Ohio, and specifically Akron, and what keeps you here?
Yeah, what kept me here when I was a younger person and didn't have to stay was just a sense of home. The family was here, the things that I liked to do were here, and there was a comfort here. But as I've grown older and written about it and thought about it, what I found is that those reasons are still valid, but on a much higher plane, which is to say that more globally, Ohio, Akron, and places like this appeal to people because, first of all, they're authentic. They seem, they have earned their scars, and they have a patina that's not fake. That's, you know, the dark smoke brick is real factory smoke on that brick. But there's also, I think, a sense of being needed in a place that has been through hard times and that a lot of people have left. Those who stay can make a real difference, and that's not lip service. Like, you can contribute in a way that's necessary and that you're rewarded by in lots of different ways.
What are some of the features of Ohio that make it an all-American buffet, to use one of your phrases, a state that is so ripe for the picking by political pollsters, for example?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is its location. Ohio is, as I write in the book, it's the end of the East and the beginning of the Midwest. It's the end of the North and the beginning of the South. It's kind of an intersection of the country in that sense, but it's also, as I also write in the book, it's not any more American than any other place, but it is completely American. And the way one of the things that I lean on in the book is something that the Bliss Institute writes about, and other journalists and analysts have written about, which is the notion of the five Ohios. And what the five Ohios refers to is the fact that there are five distinct regions in the state. There's the Northeast, where we live, which is industrial, post-industrial, very urban, densely populated. Mm-hmm. There is the Southeast, or the Southwest, surrounding Cincinnati, which is much more southern, more conservative. There's the Northwest, which is very rural. It's kind of the beginning of what feels more like the true Midwest. There's Central Ohio, which is dominated by Columbus, which is a growing urban, exurban kind of city, and it also has the third largest university in the country. And then there's the Southeast, which is Appalachia. So it's five distinct regions, each of which has its own personality that mirrors some aspect of the American personality that's different from the other. Each one has its own sort of media personality. Each one it votes in a different way. And so if you take those five examples and you analyze them, you can see most of America represented here in a way that, as the Bliss Institute asserts, no other state does.
And how did you determine which places, cities specifically to visit, and which people you wanted to talk to?
Yeah, I drew a very crude map of Ohio at the very beginning of this project because I wanted to see where was the intersection of my own curiosity, because I think any writing project needs to be driven by questions, and the intersection of my own curiosity and what I knew or thought was already out there. So there were certain stories I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell the story of race in America. I wanted to tell the story of women as they're evolving as part of the electorate and as candidates in new ways. Wanted to tell the story of opioids. Wanted to tell the story of cities struggling with economic problems and so forth. I wanted to go to farms, especially last year, because farmers were in the spotlight because of the trade war with China, and also because of the historic weather, which goes to climate change. And so there were all these themes that I wanted to touch on, and it didn't matter what theme I thought of. There was a place in Ohio, I could find a place in Ohio that said, this will tell that story. Like, it was sort of proving my thesis that it's completely American, and so every American theme that I wanted to find, I was able to find.
What were some of the best experiences, whether places, events, or people, on your tour?
The best experiences in any journalism project is when somebody allows you in, because you go to listen, but people are naturally on edge or uncertain, and what I found was that people really wanted to be heard. I felt that going in. I know what it's like to live in Ohio, where we often get told our story from the outside and not asked our story from the inside, and so I was very sensitive to that. But I found that people really had these stories that they wanted to tell. So one example, I went to Mansfield, and my main purpose of going to Mansfield was to visit a relatively new craft brewery, because that's another part of this trend toward craft brewers, not just as a business trend, but as a social trend. Craft brewers are very often the cornerstone in turning around a beleaguered neighborhood or a beleaguered downtown, and Mansfield certainly has a beleaguered downtown. So I went to talk to these craft brewers, and they were a great story, but while I was there, I went to talk to somebody I knew, Leyland Fowler, who manages Main Street Books. It's a little independent bookstore in downtown Mansfield. You would think that would be the worst business model ever, and yet she guts it out. And so when she told her story of why she's lived and managed bookstores in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and in Boston, and she comes back to her hometown of Mansfield. So the question is always, why? And for her, it was in part because it was home, but she said everywhere else that she had lived, she had never felt the true sense of America that she feels living and working in downtown Mansfield. She described it as Sesame Street. She leaves her apartment in the morning, she walks down the street, and everybody's in their storefront going, "Hey, Leyland, hi." And it's this really heartwarming story, but it's a struggle to do it there. Mm-hmm. And so she's not making any money. And she said the reason she does it is because she said, and she puts it better than I can paraphrase it, but she says, this is what people want to believe America is. But look at what you have to sacrifice. Look at the comfort. It's way easier to shop on Amazon and go to Walmart when you need something and operate that way than it is to go to a downtown independent bookseller in Mansfield, Ohio, and to be true to an ideal of Americanism. And yet people crave it. So what's that tension? And she explored that tension, I think, incredibly well.
Did you make any surprising discoveries? Were any of your expectations proven wrong?
From my experience in working on a book project, is you go in knowing what questions you're pursuing, and you go in knowing the direction you think you're going, but inevitably the work of writing develops a mind of its own, and it kind of tells you what it's about. And so it was nearer the end of this project that a question started to apply to everything that I did. And I didn't really think of this as the main question of the book until much later, and then when I went back and began revising, I realized this question shed light on almost everything I was writing about. And the question it's actually two questions. It's who will listen to me, and what do they want in return? And it seemed to me that that's the question of the politician, that's the question of the voter, that's the question of the citizen. It's a very human question, but it's also a very political question. And I guess what surprised me is I knew that my children were going to be part of this story. Not a main part. It's part memoir, but it's very much also a political and social analysis. But my daughter turned 18 just in time to vote in the 2016 election, an historic election for a young woman to be voting in, the first female mainstream presidential candidate versus a candidate with accusations of misogyny and just at a charged moment for any young person, but especially a young woman. My son began the Akron Police Academy, became a rookie cop exactly in the year that's patterned in this book. So his experiences as a cop became an important part of the story. And so I was aware of them in relation to that question, who will listen to me and what do they want in return? But what I thought going in was that was the personal part of the story, and in a way they became the most political part of the story, because every question and theme and concern in this book, as it applied to them, represented it caused me to think about the future in a really personal but also sort of American kind of way. What will become of them? So there's a chapter about race, and in that chapter I had the opportunity to ask different people, what should my son, as a young white police officer in some of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods, very black neighborhoods in Akron, what should he understand that maybe I don't know he should understand? And I had the opportunity to ask the first black mayor of Cincinnati, former mayor of Cincinnati, who had became mayor right after the historic 2001 riots following the police shooting of a young unarmed black man. What should he understand? And he was able to shed light. Was able to ask a friend of mine, a young black man from Detroit, what should he understand? It was interesting. I asked this. We were having dinner in Cleveland, and I said, what should my son, young white cop, understand? And he, without missing a beat, he said, assume I'm smarter than you. And I loved that answer because I knew what he meant, but the more I thought about what he meant, the more expansive it became. And so I guess what surprised me was how political and global my own children's stories became for me as I wrote about them.
Early in the book, you talked about the troubling misalignment of the country, and arguably since then it's become much more misaligned.
Yeah.
But did you find anything that encouraged you, that actually gave you hope for the future?
I found greater and greater evidence and concern of how divided we are, how our default is to make things very simple one way or the other and no middle. So I was discouraged by that. What gave me hope, the person I spent the most time with was a young man from Akron who I just met by chance. At the time he was a student at Stark State, had no money. He was walking over an hour each way to school each day to try to get his associate's degree, to get himself started after some false starts in life. And I spent the whole year with him. It was different visits with him over the course of the year, and that part of the book ends with I traveled with him to Ohio State University last August when he was just about to start his full undergraduate program there in political science. Deeply interested in politics, deeply concerned about the divisions in the country. Young African-American man, so deeply concerned about racial division and injustice. And the reason I just was attracted to him at the beginning was because he had this exuberant spirit, this sense of hope. And the last we met was in late winter in Columbus. He had been through his first semester, was beginning his second semester at Ohio State, and I asked him where that optimism was. And he gave this long, thoughtful, well-considered answer, which was not simple I'm still optimistic. It was despite the fact that he has found, being in a bigger stage, in a political science program where politics are being openly discussed and feeling uncomfortable discussing his own views, that he still believes that there is the opportunity for someone like him to have a voice that will be listened to and taken on its own merit. So it's a very measured hope, which I think is the most real hope that we can expect right now in a time when it would be very easy to become cynical. Like, I'm the most optimistic person I know. And even I was becoming downhearted by the time I was finishing this year-long journey, because I just kept finding evidence of the things I didn't want to believe were universal. And he gave me evidence that there are levels of nuance to our divisiveness and to the questions of race and the questions of what can a young person even hope for. He's trying to get through school without student debt. All of these topics that seem like topics that are very much part of his life. And yet I could see his future still as bright. So I guess that's the hope that I take away.
You write that Ohio's greatest desire is simply to be heard, because it's a place that knows it has something useful to say. So what does Ohio have to say?
Ohio has an authentic voice. That's one thing that I think we can say for certain. And by authenticity, I mean that we are a place that has been through hard times, and we have the lessons of what hard times bring that are useful to places which, right now, all of America is enduring hard times. So if you can look to the places that have already been through it in their own ways, we have something to offer. So tell me the specific question again.
What does Ohio have to say to the country? Why should they listen to Ohioans?
So I think it's that. I think it's that we've been through a lot of these things, and we have something to learn. But I think more broadly, and this is where the book, the subtitle of the book is To Understand America. And really, Ohio's not unique. Most places are like Ohio. Most places aren't heard, aren't listened to. We get most of our information and voices from the center, the entertainment and information centers, which are small and concentrated and not as diverse as the rest of us. Most of us get told who we are by pollsters and analysts and journalists, and not asked who we are and listened to, and also not asked who we are and listened to outside of the political cycles. So, who was coming here in late 2017 asking about us? Not much. Guess what's about to happen, like right now for the next 3 months? It's going to be everywhere. So, so just that idea of most places should be listened to and taken seriously in the way that Ohio should. I think that's something that has a ripple effect through much of America, if not most of America.
And what, after years of exploring and writing about Ohio, does David Giffels have to say? Because you're one of those Ohioan voices. What's your message to Ohio and to the country?
It just that we have value, and I don't think I need to say that. I think we know that we have value. Like I said before, we've lived through our hard times. Ohioans are great at humor, going all the way back to Thurber, but and through Harvey Pekar, and the reason is because, and this is any place that has been looked down on or flown over becomes used to being the punchline, and so we're quicker to the joke. And we're able to make fun of ourselves. And I quote Mark Twain. I don't think that it's disputed whether he actually said this, but it's a quote that sounds like Mark Twain and that we can understand. He said of Cincinnati once, he said, "I hope when the world ends that I'm in Cincinnati, because it's always 20 years behind the times." And it's such a great Ohio joke because we can laugh at it better than somebody who's not from here can laugh at it. And so, I think that's one of my favorite things about the state, and I think it's a lesson that we should recognize that there's value in being the less popular kid, and there's value in being sort of an outcast or a misunderstood person, because that's most people. So we offer an example of what that feels like.
Well, I really enjoyed reading your book,
Thank
and
you.
I would encourage readers to look at your previous work. So you've previously written Furnishing Eternity, A Father, a Son, a Coffin, and a Measure of Life, Hard Way on Purpose, Essays and Dispatches from the Rust Belt, and All the Way Home, Building a Family in a Falling Down House. David Giffels is also the UA coordinator of the Northeast Ohio Master of Fine Arts Consortium here at the university. It's the only creative writing program in the country that merges the faculties of 4 universities into a single MFA program. David, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It's been a pleasure.
Nicholas. I appreciate it.